The gunshot echoed across the vast Wyoming plains as Ruby Zimmerman ran for her life, her threadbare dress snagging on sagebrush as she fled the burning orphanage behind her. At 18, she was officially too old for the state's care, but Miss Holloway had kept her on as help with the younger children until today, when strangers with bandanas covering their faces had come demanding money and setting fire to the only home Ruby had ever known. It was 1885, and the Wyoming Territory was still wild enough that a young woman alone was as good as prey. Ruby ran until her lungs burned and her legs trembled, finally collapsing behind a rocky outcropping as darkness fell. The spring night was cold and she huddled against the stone, wrapping her thin arms around herself. "Don't die out here," she whispered, her breath forming small clouds in the chill air. "Not like this." She must have fallen asleep because the next thing she knew, the sound of approaching hoofbeats startled her awake. Dawn was breaking, pale light spilling across the plains. Ruby pressed herself against the rocks, hoping to remain hidden, but the rider had already spotted her. He guided his horse directly to her hiding place and dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore a weathered duster and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. A star-shaped badge glinted on his chest. "What's a young lady doing out here all alone?" His voice was deep but not unkind. Ruby scrambled to her feet, swaying slightly from hunger and exhaustion. "Please, mister, I need help. The orphanage," her voice broke. "They burned it down." His expression darkened. "The Hamilton orphanage." "I heard the commotion from town, sheriffs gathering a posse." He studied her face. "You're one of the caretakers?" "Yes, sir, Ruby Zimmerman. I grew up there myself." She took a hesitant step forward. "Please, I've nowhere to go." The man removed his hat, revealing sandy hair and piercing blue eyes in a sun-weathered face. "I'm Deputy Ryan Calloway. I was riding out to investigate when I spotted you." He extended a hand. "Come with me, Miss Zimmerman. You're safe now." Ruby hesitated, her years at the orphanage having taught her caution around strangers, even those with badges. "How do I know I can trust you?" Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "Smart question. You don't. But staying out here alone isn't an option, and I give you my word as an officer of the law that I'll see you safely to town." Ruby glanced back toward the horizon where a thin plume of smoke still rose from what had been her home. Did anyone else? She couldn't finish the question. "Miss Holloway and most of the children made it out. They're being cared for in Broken Creek." He paused. "I'm sorry about the others." Relief and grief warred within her as Ruby nodded. "Thank you for telling me." Deputy Calloway led his horse closer. "Can you ride?" "Yes." He helped her mount, then swung up behind her. Ruby sat stiffly at first, uncomfortable with the stranger's proximity, but as they rode, the steady rhythm of the horse and the solid presence at her back gradually eased her tension. "What will happen to me now?" she asked as the small town of Broken Creek came into view. "First, we get you fed and rested," he said. "Then we'll figure out the rest." The deputy took her to a modest boarding house run by a plump, gray-haired woman named Mrs. Peterson, who clucked sympathetically when she saw Ruby's state. "Poor dear," she said, ushering Ruby inside. "Let's get you cleaned up and fed." After a hot bath and a hearty meal, Ruby felt almost human again. Mrs. Peterson provided a simple but clean dress to replace her smoke-stained garments. When Deputy Calloway returned that evening, Ruby was sitting in the boarding house parlor, staring out the window at the unfamiliar town. "Any news of the men who did this?" she asked without preamble. He shook his head. "Not yet, but we will find them." He sat across from her. "Miss Zimmerman, I've spoken with the sheriff. The town council has agreed to help the orphans, but I'm too old for charity," Ruby finished for him. At his surprised look, she smiled sadly. "I've heard those words before, Deputy." "Ryan," he corrected. "And that's not quite what I was going to say. The council's help only extends so far. The younger children will be sent to orphanages in Cheyenne or Laramie, but for you, I can work," Ruby said quickly. I'm good with numbers, I can cook and clean and so, I just need a chance. Ryan nodded. That's why I'm here. My sister Sarah runs the general store. She needs help, especially with the books. It's not much, but it comes with a room above the store. Ruby stared at him. Why would you do this for me? Because everyone deserves a chance. His eyes met hers. And because I think you'd do the same if our positions were reversed. The next morning, Ryan introduced Ruby to his sister, a practical woman in her 30s with the same blue eyes as her brother. Sarah Calloway was direct but fair, showing Ruby around the store and explaining her duties. Ryan speaks highly of you, Sarah said as they worked together that afternoon. He doesn't usually take such an interest. Ruby felt her cheeks warm. He's been very kind. Sarah gave her a knowing look but said nothing more. Over the next few weeks, Ruby settled into her new life. The small room above the store became her haven, the first space that had ever truly belonged to her alone. She proved adept at managing the store's accounts, and Sarah soon trusted her to handle more responsibilities. Ryan visited the store often, sometimes on official business but increasingly just to talk with Ruby. She found herself looking forward to his visits, enjoying his quiet humor and steady presence. One evening, as she was closing up, Ryan appeared at the door. "I thought you might like to see something," he said, looking almost shy. "What is it?" Ruby asked, curious at his expression, a surprise. "But you'll need your shawl." Outside, a buggy waited. Ryan helped her up and took the reins, driving them out of town as the sun began to set. They followed a winding path along a creek until they reached a small clearing with a view of the mountains. "It's beautiful," Ruby breathed, taking in the vista painted in golds and purples by the setting sun. Ryan smiled. "I found this place when I first came to Broken Creek. I come here to think." He hesitated. "I wanted to share it with you." Something in his voice made Ruby look at him more carefully. In the soft evening light, she noticed details she'd overlooked before: the way his smile creased the corners of his eyes, the gentleness in his hands as he held the reins. "Thank you for bringing me," she said softly. They sat in companionable silence as the stars appeared. Ryan pointed out constellations, telling her stories his grandfather had taught him. When it grew too dark to see clearly, he reluctantly turned the buggy toward town. At her door, he helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Good night, Ruby." "Good night, Ryan." She watched him go, a strange new feeling fluttering in her chest. The following Saturday, news reached Broken Creek that the men who had attacked the orphanage had been spotted near the Colorado border. Ryan rode out with the sheriff and several deputies, promising Ruby he would return soon. The days of his absence stretched long. Ruby threw herself into work at the store, but worry gnawed at her. Sarah noticed her distraction. "He'll be all right," she assured Ruby. "My brother's too stubborn to get himself killed," Ruby blushed. "I'm just concerned as a friend would be." Sarah's knowing look made it clear she wasn't fooled. "He cares for you, you know, more than he's cared for anyone since Caroline died." "Caroline?" Ruby asked, unable to hide her curiosity. "His wife, she died of fever 3 years ago," Sarah sighed. "It nearly destroyed him. He threw himself into his work after that, never letting anyone close until you." The revelation stayed with Ruby as she went about her duties. That evening, alone in her room, she thought about Ryan, his kindness, his quiet strength, the way he looked at her when he thought she wouldn't notice. For the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge that what she felt for him was more than gratitude or friendship. A week passed with no word. Then, late one night, Ruby was awakened by commotion in the street. She rushed to the window to see riders entering town. In the dim light of the street lamps, she recognized Ryan's tall figure, slumped slightly in the saddle. Without thinking, she grabbed her shawl and hurried downstairs and out into the street. The sheriff was helping Ryan dismount. As Ruby drew closer, she saw the blood-stained bandage around his upper arm. "Ryan," she called out, pushing through the gathering crowd. He turned, his weary face lighting up at the sight of her. "Ruby, you should be asleep." "You're hurt," she said, ignoring his comment. "It's just a graze." but he winced as he moved. The sheriff looked between them. "Get him home and cleaned up, Miss Zimmerman." He refused to see the doctor before reporting back. "Of course he did," Ruby muttered, taking Ryan's good arm. "Come on, deputy, let's get you patched up." She led him to his small house at the edge of town. Inside, she lit lamps and helped him remove his duster and shirt to examine the wound. It was indeed a graze, but it had bled considerably and looked angry at the edges. "This needs cleaning," she said, grateful for the medical knowledge Miss Holloway had instilled in her caretakers. Ryan watched her as she worked, his eyes never leaving her face. "We got them," he said quietly. "All three, they won't hurt anyone else." Ruby's hands stilled momentarily. "Good," she resumed, cleaning the wound. "Did they say why the orphanage?" "Money. They thought there'd be donation funds kept there." His voice was tight with anger. Senseless cruelty for a few dollars that weren't even there. When she had finished bandaging his arm, Ruby made tea and sat with him at his small kitchen table. He told her about the pursuit and capture, about the men's confessions and how they would face justice in Cheyenne. "I kept thinking about you," he admitted, his voice low. "About keeping my promise to come back." Ruby's heart quickened. "I worried every day, did you?" There was a vulnerability in his question that touched her deeply. "Yes." She reached across the table and laid her hand over his. "Very much." His fingers curled around hers. For a long moment they sat in silence, connected by that simple touch. "I should go," Ruby said eventually, reluctant but aware of propriety. "Sarah will wonder where I am." Ryan nodded, though he didn't release her hand. "Ruby, when I was out there, I realized something." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Life's too short and too uncertain to waste time being cautious with your heart." She met his gaze, hardly daring to breathe. "I care for you," he continued. "More than I thought I could care for anyone again. I know it's soon, and I know your life has been appended enough without me adding to it, but I care for you too," Ruby interrupted softly. "You've been my anchor in this storm, Ryan, my safe harbor." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned across the table. His lips met hers in a gentle kiss that promised more. Over the following months, their relationship deepened. Ryan courted Ruby properly, taking her to church socials and town dances, riding with her to his special clearing by the creek. The townsfolk watched with approval as the somber deputy came back to life, and the orphaned girl blossomed under his attention. Sarah teased them both mercilessly but confided to Ruby that she had never seen her brother so happy. In the autumn, with golden leaves drifting down around them, Ryan took Ruby to their clearing and dropped to one knee. "Ruby Zimmerman, you came into my life when I least expected it but most needed it. You've brought light back into my world." He held out a simple ring with a small sapphire. "Will you marry me?" Tears blurred Ruby's vision as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." They were married in Broken Creek's small church as the first snow of winter dusted the ground outside. Ruby wore a dress that Sarah had helped her make, and Ryan looked handsome in his best suit, his badge polished and gleaming. After the ceremony, as they greeted well-wishers, Sheriff Thomas pulled Ryan aside. Ruby couldn't hear their conversation, but she saw Ryan's expression change from happiness to concern. Later, as they rode to the cabin Ryan had been building for them outside town, he told her the news. "The sheriff's retiring come spring. He's recommended me to the town council as his replacement." Ryan looked uncertain. "It would mean more responsibility, more risk." Ruby squeezed his hand. "It would also mean you could do more good, and I'll be right beside you, whatever you decide." Ryan brought her hand to his lips. "How did I get so lucky?" "I ask myself the same question every day," she replied with a smile. Winter passed in a haze of newlywed bliss. Ryan continued his duties as deputy while finishing their cabin, and Ruby divided her time between helping Sarah at the store and making their house a home. In the spring, as promised, Sheriff Thomas retired, and Ryan was sworn in as the new sheriff of Broken Creek. The same week, Ruby discovered she was expecting their first child, When she told Ryan the news, he swept her into his arms and spun her around their cabin, his laughter mingling with hers. "A family," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "Our family." That summer brought challenges. A drought strained the region's farmers and ranchers, and tensions ran high. As sheriff, Ryan worked tirelessly to keep the peace. Ruby supported him while managing her own growing discomfort as their child grew within her. One hot August night, Ruby awoke to find Ryan's side of the bed empty. A note on his pillow told her he'd been called to mediate a dispute at the Harrington Ranch and would return by morning. Ruby tried to go back to sleep, but felt unusually restless. Around dawn, a sharp pain made her gasp. Her waters broke moments later. Alone and frightened, Ruby managed to dress and make her way to their porch, praying someone would pass by. As luck would have it, young Jimmy Peterson was delivering early morning milk and saw her signal. "Get Sarah Calloway and the midwife," Ruby instructed him through gritted teeth. "And if you see the sheriff, tell him his child is coming." The hours that followed were a blur of pain and determination. Sarah arrived quickly along with Mrs. Wilson, the town's experienced midwife. They helped Ruby back to bed and prepared for the birth. "Where's Ryan?" Ruby asked between contractions. "Jimmy's father rode out to find him," Sarah assured her, wiping Ruby's brow with a cool cloth. "He'll be here." The labor progressed rapidly. By mid-morning, Mrs. Wilson was telling Ruby to push. Outside, hoofbeats thundered up to the cabin, and moments later Ryan burst through the door, his face pale with worry. "Am I too late?" he asked, eyes wild. "Just in time," Mrs. Wilson said calmly. "Come hold your wife's hand. This baby's eager to meet you both." Ryan was at Ruby's side in an instant, taking her hand and pressing his lips to her damp forehead. "I'm here, love, I'm here." With Ryan supporting her, Ruby found new strength. Several pushes later, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the cabin. "She's perfect," Ryan whispered as Mrs. Wilson placed the swaddled infant in Ruby's arms, "just like her mother." They named her Hope for all she represented to them both. The years that followed brought more children, twin boys named Thomas and James, born 2 years after Hope, and another daughter, Catherine, 3 years later. Ryan continued as sheriff, earning a reputation for fairness and integrity throughout the county. Ruby managed their growing household and became involved in community efforts, particularly those supporting orphan children. 10 years after Ruby had fled the burning orphanage, a new one stood in Broken Creek, built with donations she had helped raise and run by a board on which she served. She made sure every child there knew they were valued, that their circumstances didn't define them. On the anniversary of the day Ryan had found her hiding behind those rocks, he always took her to their special clearing. It became a tradition, a day for just the two of them to remember how their story began. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat watching the sunset from their clearing, Ryan took Ruby's hand. "When I found you that morning, I never imagined what you would come to mean to me," he said. "You were just a girl who needed help." Ruby smiled, the years having only deepened her love for him. "And you were just a man doing his duty. You know, that first day when you looked up at me with those determined eyes and said, 'Please, mister,' something inside me knew." Ryan's voice grew soft with memory. "I didn't understand it then, but some part of me recognized you as mine. I remember what you said when I asked if I could trust you," Ruby replied. "You said I couldn't know for certain, but staying alone wasn't an option." Ryan nodded. "And now?" "Now I know with absolute certainty." She leaned against him, content. "And being alone is unimaginable." They sat in companionable silence as the stars appeared, just as they had on their first visit to this place. The challenges they had faced, and there had been many, had only strengthened their bond. The orphaned girl and the widowed deputy had found in each other what both had thought lost forever. A home, a family, a love that defied the odds. As twilight deepened into night, Ryan helped Ruby to her feet. "We should head back. The children will be waiting." Ruby nodded, but before they left, she turned to look once more at the view that had captivated her all those years ago. Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you hadn't found me that morning? Ryan's arms encircled her from behind, and he rested his chin on her shoulder. I don't believe in coincidence, Ruby. I was meant to find you. We were meant to find each other. The cowboy and the orphan girl, she said with a soft laugh. My favorite story, he murmured against her hair. They rode home beneath a canopy of stars, returning to the cabin that had grown along with their family. Lights spilled from the windows, and as they approached, they could hear their children's voices, Hope reading a story to Catherine, the twins arguing good-naturedly over a game. Ruby paused before entering, taking in the scene through the window. This was her life now, so far from the lonely existence she had once known, so full of love and purpose. Ryan came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers. Welcome home, Mrs. Calloway. Ruby squeezed his fingers, her heart full. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. Together, they opened the door and stepped inside, greeted by the joyful chaos of their family, a family forged from loss and hope, sealed by love and made stronger by every challenge they had faced together. As Hope ran to embrace her, Ruby caught Ryan's eye across the room. The look that passed between them held all the words they didn't need to say: gratitude for the past, joy in the present, and faith in the future they would continue to build together. The orphan girl had found her home. The cowboy had found his heart, and the life they had created together was more beautiful than either could have imagined on that fateful Wyoming morning when their paths first crossed.